What if a reconnaissance aircraft, so slow, so fragile, and so laughably underpowered, suddenly began outrunning the very German fighters built to annihilate it? What if a machine designed only to observe started defying physics, humiliating elite Luftwaffe pilots, and returning from missions it had statistically zero chance of surviving? That is the unsettling mystery buried inside war archives. A mystery that begins not with a heroic pilot or a brilliant engineer, but with a single adjustment on the engine, an adjustment so small, so stupid, so mechanically insignificant that no official manual ever mentioned it. And yet, it changed everything. At first, enemy pilots refused to believe the reports. A recon plane escaping a missile. Impossible. A lumbering observer aircraft outrunning a fighter at full throttle. Ridiculous. But the stories kept coming, whispered by German crews who insisted they had seen something unnatural in the sky. Something quick, something slippery, something that should not exist. And every time they tried to catch it, the same thing happened. It pulled away. The Allied squadron operating the aircraft was just as confused. Nothing about that plane suggested speed or survivability. Its airframe flexed under stress. Its armor was nearly non-existent. A single burst from a German cannon could shred it in seconds. Pilots joked that the only reason they survived was because the enemy laughed too hard to shoot straight. Yet suddenly, without new parts, without factory upgrades, without any official modification, the aircraft began performing like an entirely different machine. Faster climbs, sharper turns, a throttle response that felt alive instead of sluggish. Even seasoned pilots felt a nervous rush. The first time they realized the aircraft was no longer struggling to stay in the sky, it was eager to run. Word spread through the base like fire. Mechanics gathered around the plane after each mission, searching for clues. Pilots compared notes, swearing the aircraft was behaving like a predator instead of prey. Some insisted it must be a one-time mechanical fluke. Others believed it was the start of a new top-secret Allied engine program. But deep inside the hangar, away from the noise, one man already suspected the truth because he was the one who had done it. He had made an adjustment no commanding officer had approved, no engineering department had recommended, and no manual had ever encouraged. He had noticed an anomaly, a subtle drag in the engine's response, something too trivial for most mechanics to bother with, and instead of ignoring it, he followed his instinct. The result was not just an improvement, it was a transformation. But how could something so insignificant unleash such performance? Why did this tiny change give a reconnaissance aircraft the ability to outrun professional killers of the sky? And why, for weeks, did no one understand what had happened? Those answers would soon shake an entire air unit and ripple all the way to German intelligence officers, desperately trying to explain the unexplainable. And as you will see next, the moment this adjustment took effect, the battlefield itself began to shift in ways no strategist had predicted. If you're intrigued by how a single stupid adjustment transformed an aircraft from fragile reconnaissance to a machine that outperformed elite German fighters, don't just watch in silence. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think made the plane so unstoppable? Your insight helps us explore these forgotten stories with greater depth. And while you're at it, hit that like button to signal to YouTube that these untold military histories deserve more visibility. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the hidden wartime innovations, daring missions, and incredible human ingenuity that changed the course of battles in ways textbooks never fully explain. Every comment, every like, every subscription is part of keeping these extraordinary moments alive. Where are you watching from? Have you ever heard about a small, seemingly trivial adjustment that had massive consequences? Drop it below and join our community of history enthusiasts uncovering the secrets of war. The skies over Europe during World War II were a theater of relentless danger, where every maneuver could mean life or death. Imagine a thin, unarmored reconnaissance plane cutting across hostile airspace, tasked with gathering intelligence while surrounded by aircraft designed solely for destruction. The enemy fighters Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulf swear, not just superior numbers, they were engineered for agility, speed, and lethality. Pilots were trained to exploit every weakness, to anticipate every mistake. In this environment, the smallest miscalculation could spell instant catastrophe. Statistical survival rates made the stakes brutally clear. Pilots of these reconnaissance planes were considered expendable by the doctrine of the day. Every sortie carried the chilling possibility that the plane would be spotted, pursued, and shredded before completing its mission. Allied command understood the importance of intelligence, but each flight was a gamble with a deck stacked against them. Reports of missing aircraft and downed pilots filled the logs daily, with no time to mourn before the next mission. This was a world where numbers mattered more than individual skill, and every minor mechanical imperfection could tip the balance toward death. But within this lethal framework, there was something that ordinary calculations and standard manuals didn't account for: human ingenuity. In the chaos of high-altitude dogfights and high-stakes reconnaissance runs, experience alone could not save a pilot if the machine itself was sluggish, if controls responded too slowly, or if the engine lagged by mere fractions of a second. Each plane had a personality, and in the extreme environment of aerial warfare, the smallest quirks could either betray the pilot or save him. Enemy intelligence, methodical and precise, would analyze patterns, seeking the slightest anomaly. They studied climb rates, turning radii, engine responsiveness, and pilot behavior. But the unquantifiable intuition, improvisation, and courage was impossible to measure. When a plane behaved unpredictably, German pilots were confused, unable to anticipate its moves. Reports would arrive at Luftwaffe headquarters noting that something was off. A reconnaissance plane maneuvering in ways deemed impossible, evading interceptors, and sometimes even outrunning fighters built for combat. The uncertainty unnerved the enemy, altering their tactical confidence and forcing them to adapt on the fly. Meanwhile, for the pilots flying these vulnerable aircraft, every mission was a trial. They had to maintain awareness of altitude, speed, enemy positions, and mission objectives simultaneously, all while navigating mechanical inconsistencies that could turn fatal in the blink of an eye. The psychological toll was immense. Fear became a constant companion, tempered only by discipline, training, and, occasionally, the lucky quirks of machinery. Yet this pressure cooker of danger also fostered the conditions for innovation. Pilots and mechanics alike learned to observe, to anticipate, and to experiment, sometimes bending the rules or attempting modifications that might, at first glance, seem foolish, yet had the potential to tip the odds in their favor. It was in this crucible of mortal risk that the stage was set for a singular revelation, that a seemingly insignificant adjustment, overlooked and dismissed by manuals and engineers alike, could transform a fragile reconnaissance aircraft into a machine capable of survival against overwhelming odds. Every previous loss, every tactical limitation, every defeated mission created the perfect storm for this unlikely breakthrough. The tension was absolute, the stakes unimaginably high. And as the story unfolds, you'll see how the tiniest tweak in the engine's behavior would not only alter the fate of a single plane, but change the strategic calculus of aerial operations entirely. Before the transformation that would leave German pilots questioning their instruments, this reconnaissance aircraft was a joke among its own crews. Lightly built, painfully slow, and notoriously unresponsive. It was the kind of machine pilots accepted as a necessary evil rather than a reliable partner in the sky. Its thin skin could barely endure turbulence, let alone enemy fire. Its climb rate was so weak that instructors used it as an example of what not to do in an emergency. And its maximum speed. German fighters considered it little more than a moving target, a training exercise disguised as a mission. Mechanically, the aircraft was nothing special. Its engine produced just enough power to keep it airborne, but not enough to inspire confidence. The controls felt sluggish, requiring pilots to anticipate every maneuver seconds in advance in eternity in combat terms. If a German interceptor appeared on the horizon, the pilot of this reconnaissance plane had only two realistic options: dive and pray for cloud cover, or hope the fighter pilot was distracted long enough for him to escape. Survival depended more on luck and timing than on any engineering advantage, despite its shortcomings. This aircraft was indispensable. It served as the eyes of the army below, flying over enemy positions to gather intelligence that ground forces desperately needed. Maps, troop movements, artillery placements, every detail. Capture could save lives. Yet the irony was cruel. The very planes responsible for providing essential information were among the most vulnerable machines in the war. Their crews understood the grim mathematics. Every flight carried a razor-thin margin between mission success and disappearance. Among pilots, the aircraft earned nicknames that reflected its weaknesses: the floating coffin, the reluctant bird, the slow death. Mechanics regarded it with similar disdain. They patched bullet holes, reinforced flimsy panels, and tweaked the temperamental engine, but no one believed it could ever rival the performance of true combat aircraft. Its design philosophy prioritized observation over survivability, speed, or maneuverability in a world ruled by the brutal laws of aerial combat. The plane existed on borrowed time, yet, curiously, not all pilots saw it as hopeless. A small handful believed the aircraft hid unexplored potential. They observed subtle quirks, moments when the engine responded more sharply than expected, or when the frame seemed to grip the air differently. These anomalies were fleeting, unpredictable, and easily dismissed by others. But to experienced eyes, they hinted at something deeper: untapped efficiency buried beneath design limitations. These observations planted the first seeds of questioning questions that would later become critical. The German fighters, meanwhile, dismissed it entirely. They rarely bothered coordinating elaborate intercepts. Engaging such a slow adversary was beneath their tactical focus. This overconfidence, though unintentional, created a blind spot gap through which innovation could slip unnoticed. As long as the reconnaissance plane remained underestimated, its evolution would continue. In the shadows, away from the scrutiny of high command and tactical analysts. And it was precisely within that overlooked space where no one expected greatness, when no one imagined performance beyond the ordinary, that the breakthrough would emerge. Because sometimes history's greatest surprises come from the machines everyone ignored. The next step in this story would reveal how one man, studying these subtle quirks, realized the aircraft wasn't failing, it was waiting for the right adjustment to unlock what it had been capable of all along. In every squadron, there is usually one mechanic who treats every aircraft like a personal puzzle, someone who refuses to accept the machine as is. In this unit, that person was a quiet, meticulous technician whose name rarely appeared in reports, but whose fingerprints were on every successful mission. While others focused on quick repairs and routine checklists, he lingered, listening to the engine the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat, searching for any inconsistency, any faint irregularity that hinted at deeper potential. To most mechanics, this reconnaissance plane was a lost cause, but to him it was a challenge. He noticed details others dismissed, subtle hesitations in throttled response, a faint tremor at specific RPM ranges, and an elusive delay when the pilot demanded sudden power. These quirks were not dramatic enough to trigger official intervention, yet they bothered him, and in the brutal mathematics of war, even a fraction of a second could decide whether a pilot lived or died. One evening, after yet another mission where the aircraft returned, peppered with bullet holes but miraculously intact, the mechanic crouched beside the engine compartment, studying a familiar pattern. The same faint residue, the same uneven heat distribution. It didn't match the expected behavior of the engine. Something was robbing it of efficiency, but manuals and regulations insisted the setup was correct. That contradiction gnawed at him. Why would an engine supposedly operating within precise military specifications feel so restrained? He spent nights reviewing maintenance logs, performance charts, and old training notes. He compared identical aircraft side by side, observing how some engines felt more reactive despite being configured exactly the same. Slowly, a possibility began to form, not a revelation, but a suspicion so unconventional that he kept it to himself. What if one of the fixed settings, one of the adjustments considered sacred and untouchable, was actually wrong? Not catastrophically wrong, but wrong enough to hold back hidden power. Altering such a setting would violate protocol. Military engines were treated as holy objects built and calibrated according to rigid factory instructions. Deviating from those instructions wasn't just discouraged, it was forbidden. If a mechanic experimented with them and something went wrong, the punishment could be severe. But the mechanic couldn't ignore what he felt in his hands and heard in the engine's breathing. The aircraft was underperforming not because it was weak, but because it was constrained. His suspicion crystallized during a test run. As the pilot throttled up, he caught a micro-hesitation on, almost imperceptible delay between fuel delivery and power output. To most people it was nothing, a quirk. But to him it was the smoking gun. That delay meant the engine was not burning fuel at its optimal moment. Timing was off, ever so slightly. And in aviation, timing was everything. Changing that timing, however, meant altering a sealed adjustment once so rarely touched that many crews didn't even know it existed. And those who did considered it irrelevant. Adjusting it was seen as tampering with the engine's soul, a reckless act with unpredictable consequences. But the mechanic no longer saw it as optional. He saw it as necessary. While the squadron slept, he stood alone in the hangar, tools in hand, staring at the engine as if weighing the fate of the entire unit. The aircraft's future and perhaps the survival of its pilot rested on his willingness to break a rule no one dared to question. And in the stillness of that night, he made his decision. The adjustment he was about to make was so deceptively small, so mechanically insignificant, that even seasoned engineers rarely mentioned it. Buried deep within the engine's timing assembly was a sealed setting meant to remain untouched. The ignition advance. In theory, its calibration was already optimized at the factory, set to ignite the fuel-air mixture at the precise moment the engine needed it. In practice, especially under wartime stress, engines varied subtly from one airframe to another, But manuals were clear this setting was not to be altered under any circumstances. Touching it was considered reckless, pointless, even foolish. Yet the mechanic had seen enough. The faint delay in throttle response, the uneven heat pattern, the sluggish acceleration, everything pointed to one conclusion. The ignition timing was slightly retarded, just a few degrees. A margin so small the engine would still run, still sound normal, but would never reach its potential. Increasing the time in advance would allow the engine to ignite earlier, delivering power at the exact moment the crankshaft demanded it. It would improve responsiveness, acceleration, and top-end speed. But it also carried risk. Too much advance, and the engine could detonate, overheat, or fail catastrophically. The line between brilliance and disaster was razor. He opened the seal anyway. To anyone watching, it would have looked like routine maintenance. But inside his mind, the stakes were enormous. He turned the adjustment by the smallest measurable increment, just a few degrees. A shift so microscopic that most mechanics wouldn't have bothered. But he felt it instantly in the engine's vibration. The rhythm changed. The breathing deepened. The harmonic tremor that always irritated him vanished. It was as if the machine had sighed in relief. Still, he knew the true test would be in the air. Engines behaved differently under load, at altitude, and in combat conditions. A ground run could only reveal so much. The next morning, when the pilot approached for the day SC reconnaissance, Michan the mechanic said nothing. He simply petarded the cowling, a gesture pilots recognized as both reassurance and quiet warning. Pay attention today. Something's different. The pilot noticed it the moment he advanced the throttle. Instead of the usual sluggish crawl, the engine surged forward with startling eagerness. The runway rushed beneath him, faster than expected. Climbing out, he felt a sharpness in the controls he had never experienced before, not a dramatic change, but a clarity, a precision that made the aircraft feel lighter, more responsive. At cruising altitude, he pushed the throttle further and gasped. The aircraft accelerated. It actually accelerated, instead of plateauing at its usual maximum speed. When he banked into a turn, the frame responded more willingly. When he dove to evade flak, the engine did not choke or hesitate. It roared. The pilot felt as if he were flying a different aircraft entirely. Yet he couldn't pinpoint why. Nothing visible had changed. No new parts, no new systems, no upgrades. Just performance that defied everything he believed the plane was capable of. Back H. Bazi. He stormed into the hangar, demanding to know what had been done. The mechanic simply shrugged and said, "Just a small adjustment." But word spread quickly. Pilots whispered about a hidden modification, a secret tune-up, something forbidden that gave a dying aircraft new life. The squadron commander demanded answers. High command wanted explanations, but mechanically, nothing seemed altered enough to justify the results. What they didn't realize was that the true test of this adjustment had yet to come, because within days, this transformed aircraft would encounter a German fighter in open sky. And that meeting would rewrite everything the Luftwaffe thought it knew about speed, maneuverability, and the supposed weakness of Allied reconnaissance planes. The next mission should have been routine, a long, vulnerable flight over enemy lines. The kind that usually ended with the pilot praying the clouds stayed thick enough to hide in. But from the moment the aircraft lifted off, the mission felt different. The engine didn't just responded, leaped. The throttle obeyed instantly, like an animal released from restraint. The pilot startled, eased back, unsure if this sudden vitality was a blessing or a warning. Engines that behaved too eagerly often hinted at internal stress, misfires, or imminent mechanical failure. Yet as he stabilized the climb, the engine held steady, smooth, and powerful. Too powerful. Within minutes, curiosity overpowered caution. The pilot nudged the throttle forward again. The aircraft surged, not drifted, not crawled. Airspeed climbed into ranges he had never seen on this model. Not even in factory manuals. Was the gauge malfunctioning? He tapped it. The needle held firm. The engine roared with a crisp, confident tone he had never heard from it. That was when unease crept in. Machines didn't just improve overnight. Something was happening under the cowling, something he didn't understand. As he leveled out at operational altitude, the first real shock arrived. He pushed the aircraft into a shallow dive to begin his reconnaissance run. Normally, the engine would lag for a second or two before stabilizing, as if waking from a nap. But now, the aircraft dove like a predator. No hesitation, no mechanical protest. The controls felt tight, reactive, almost eager to follow his commands. Even the frame's usual vibration, the one pilots described as the death rattle, was gone. Everything felt unnervingly precise. Then came the moment that confirmed his fears and his astonishment. A formation of flak bursts erupted on the horizon. Enemy anti-aircraft fire was locking onto him far sooner than expected. He banked hard to the left, expecting the usual sluggish drag. Instead, the aircraft whipped into the turn with a sharpness that nearly threw him sideways. His heart pounded. This wasn't the aircraft he knew. It moved with an agility that bordered on frightening. Still, he needed proof. He leveled out and pushed the throttle to its limit. The aircraft didn't strain, it thrived. The speed increased beyond its documented maximum. Wind howled across the canopy. The pilot felt the frame tightened, like a bowstring pulled to its limit. Yet nothing trembled, nothing rattled, nothing failed. Now came the ultimate test. On the return leg, a German patrol appeared, a lone fighter sweeping the area, searching for exactly the kind of prey he was. The pilot's blood ran cold. He was too far from cloud cover, too far from friendly lines. Nowhere to hide. Instinct screamed at him to dive and prey. But something inside, perhaps the subconscious memory of that engine's new growl, told him to run instead. He pushed the throttle. The aircraft shot forward. The German fighter reacted, diving rapidly to intercept. But something bizarre happened. The distance between them didn't close. It increased, slowly at first, then steadily, then shockingly. The enemy pilot banked harder, throttling up, pushing his machine to its limit. And yet the reconnaissance plane, this fragile, underestimated relic, was pulling away. For the first time in the war, the pilot felt the surreal thrill of outrunning death, not by hiding, not by luck, but by sheer performance. He didn't understand it yet, but he knew this. Whatever had been done to his engine had crossed the line from improvement to transformation. When he landed, he didn't step out. He stumbled out, not from fear, but from adrenaline. He ran straight to the mechanic, demanding answers, demanding explanations. But even before he spoke, the mechanic saw the truth in the pilot's wide eyes. The adjustment had worked. More than worked. It had turned a sacrificial aircraft into something the enemy was not prepared to face. And the real test, a moment that would shake German pilots and Allied commanders alike, was still to come. The real revelation didn't come during the first mission after the adjustment. It came days later when the aircraft met not one German fighter, but several entire patrol sweeping the sector with ruthless efficiency. These were not rookies or inexperienced trainees. They were hardened Luftwaffe hunters accustomed to easy kills, especially when the target was a reconnaissance plane. They had no reason to expect anything unusual. To them, this aircraft was prey the moment it appeared on their horizon. The pilot spotted the fighters before they spotted Himalaya Advantage. But he knew it wouldn't last. German optics were excellent, and their pilots could read the sky like predators reading tracks in snow. In minutes, the fighters banked toward him in coordinated formation, the sun glinting off their wings like blades. His pulse quickened. His training told him the truth. No matter how well the last mission had gone, no reconnaissance aircraft outran a full German intercept group. Not in theory, not in history, not ever. But theories were about to collapse. Instead of diving for cover, he leveled the aircraft, letting it gain momentum. The engine roared with a force that still startled him. The nose pitched forward, and the plane surged ahead. One of the German fighters dove aggressively, lining up the perfect attack angle. He squeezed his triggers, expecting the reconnaissance plane to freeze under pressure as it always had. Yet the target did something impossible. It accelerated out of his gun sight, not gradually, instantly, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Confusion spread through the German formation. Radio chatter erupted. Pilots questioned their instruments. Was the wind aiding the Allied plane? Was their airspeed miscalculated? Another fighter closed in, diving from above to trap the reconnaissance aircraft in a deadly pincer maneuver. But when he committed to the attack, the target banked sharply far, sharper than its design should allow. It cut through the air with a confidence that confused its pursuers. The lead German pilot, a veteran with dozens of kills, adapted quickly. He throttled up, pushing his engine to maximum. The G-forces pressed his body into the seat. He fully expected to overtake the recon plane within seconds. Except he didn't. The gap remained stubbornly wide. Then, horrifyingly, it began to grow. This was impossible. Reconnaissance planes didn't outrun fighters. They didn't climb faster. They didn't respond as if possessed by a new aerodynamic soul. And yet this one did. Every maneuver the German pilots employed attacks, energy, retention, turns, cutting, angles. They were fighting physics, and physics was losing. One of the German fighters pulled alongside long enough to catch a glimpse of the pilot's silhouette. For a fraction of a second, the two men locked eyes across the sky. The German pilot saw something he never expected to come. Determination. And a machine that did not fear him. That moment shook him more than any bullet could. Realizing they could not intercept, the German formation abandoned the chase. Not because they ran out of fuel, not because they were outmaneuvered in a dogfight, but because they failed to catch their target at all. A reconnaissance aircraft had simply escaped them by being faster. When the Allied pilot returned to base, mechanics and officers rushed toward him, expecting a damaged aircraft, a shaken man, a narrow escape. Instead, he climbed down in stunned silence. He didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then he said 6 words that rippled through the unit like thunder. They couldn't even reach me. That was the moment when denial ended. The adjustment wasn't a fluke. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a breakthrough, one that shifted the balance of aerial survival and sparked panic inside the Luftwaffe's intelligence circles. News of the encounter spread faster than any official report. Pilots whispered about it in mess halls. Mechanics repeated it with growing conviction, and intelligence officers tried to dismiss each reconnaissance aircraft outrunning multiple German fighters wasn't just unusual. It was strategically, if true, it meant the Luftwaffe could no longer assume air superiority in sectors where they once dominated effortlessly. It meant their intercept patterns, altitude strategies, and pursuit doctrines were suddenly outdated against a plane that shouldn't have been a threat at all. German intelligence received the first fragments of this story through confused pilots who returned from missions insisting they had witnessed an Allied aircraft perform maneuvers that defied its known specifications. In their reports, they described sudden bursts of speed inconsistent with the model's design, turns executed with Predator-like precision and acceleration that seemed almost chemical in intensity. At first, analysts blamed pilot error or atmospheric conditions. But then more reports followed. Different pilots, different days, same impossible results. Inside Luftwaffe headquarters, maps were redrawn and diagrams constructed to analyze the anomaly. Engineers were consulted. Flight instructors were questioned. How could an aircraft historically categorized as non-threatening suddenly behave like a modified fighter? Theories emerged. Was it a new Allied engine, a fuel additive, a weight reduction program, a secret aerodynamic upgrade? Some officers even speculated that the Allies had begun deploying prototypes in the field, aircraft disguised as reconnaissance models to mislead German pilots. But the numbers didn't lie. Radar traces showed unexplained velocity spikes. Visual sightings confirmed sharper maneuverability. The mysterious aircraft wasn't just surviving intercept. Attempts it was avoiding them entirely. If this trend continued, Germany risked losing its ability to prevent reconnaissance operations, which would give Allied commanders a devastating advantage. And in a war where information was power, that advantage could be fatal. Meanwhile, on the Allied side, confusion mixed with disbelief. Officers attempted to analyze the aircraft's newfound performance without admitting that the root cause came from a single mechanic violating standard procedure. They feared chaos if other crews attempted similar adjustments without understanding the risks. Yet the results were impossible to ignore. Mission after mission, the modified aircraft returned unscathed. It brought back clearer photographs, more accurate intelligence, and faster turnaround times. Its absence from the casualty logs did not go unnoticed. These squadrons' morale skyrocketed. Pilots who once dreaded reconnaissance assignments now volunteered for them, eager to fly the miracle plane. Ground crews inspected the engine obsessively, searching for visible modifications. Instead, they found something more unsettling: nothing. No unofficial parts, no experimental systems, no prototypes. Just a standard engine with a sealed timing adjustment that was, very quietly, no longer sealed. As German confusion grew, so did Allied confidence. Something had fundamentally shifted in the strategic landscape, even if no one fully understood how. Every time the aircraft took off, commanders braced for it to fail, to reveal the improvement as a temporary fluke. But it never did. The performance remained consistent, reliable, unquestionable. And deep inside the Luftwaffe's analytical center, frustration turned to alarm. Their pilots were being outrun not by superior technology, but by something far more dangerous: unpredictability. They could not craft countermeasures without knowing the cause. They could not adjust tactics without understanding the threat. The idea that an insignificant modification, a stupid adjustment, could unravel their intercept strategies was unthinkable, yet the evidence mounted relentlessly. The small eye of doubt became a storm. If one Allied reconnaissance plane could transform so dramatically, who was to say others wouldn't follow? How long before this secret spread across entire squadrons? The Germans did not fear the aircraft itself. They feared what it represented, a shift in innovation beyond their visibility, beyond their control. And within the Allied unit, that fear mirrored a different one. Commanders now faced a choice that could change everything: reveal the adjustment and risk chaos, or embrace it and rewrite policy. The revelation that a single, unofficial adjustment had produced such a dramatic leap in performance sent a shockwave through the Allied command structure. Word reached the squadron leader first, carried not by reports but by the unmistakable change in his pilots. They walked differently, stood differently, spoke with a confidence unheard of among reconnaissance crews. Victory real, undeniable victory thus, that two men who were once treated as expendable. But confidence alone wasn't enough. The commander needed an explanation. When he confronted the mechanic, the truth came out in fragments, reluctantly but honestly. There was no prototype engine, no new fuel blend, no classified upgrade, just a timing adjustment so minor it bordered on absurdity. At first, the commander was furious. Breaking protocol was not a trivial offense. Tampering with sealed components could result in catastrophic engine failure, endangering pilots, missions, and the entire intelligence operation that depended on these flights. Yet, the results could not be dismissed. Every performance log, every mission tape, every radar trace confirmed the same reality. The airplane was now outperforming enemy fighters long enough to escape them. It was doing its job better than ever before. It was surviving. And in the brutal arithmetic of war, survival was the rarest currency. A tense meeting followed. Officers gathered around the aircraft like surgeons preparing for an autopsy. They inspected the engine, reviewed the mechanics, notes, debated the risks, argued over the ethics. Some insisted the adjustment was reckless and should be reversed immediately. Others, those who had watched too many pilots fail to return, saw it differently. If this tiny alteration could save lives, how could they justify ignoring it? Still, regulation stood in the way. Military doctrine is rigid for a reason. Consistency, predictability, and safety. Changing a single parameter, even slightly, could create unforeseen mechanical stresses. If other mechanics attempted to replicate the adjustment without understanding its delicacy, engines could detonate mid-flight. The line between innovation and disaster was perilously thin. The turning point came when the pilot of the modified aircraft entered the room. He stood before the officers, still shaken from his encounter with the German fighters, but fueled by the clarity of someone who had confronted death and outrun it. He didn't give a speech. He didn't plead. He simply stated the truth. Without that adjustment, I would not be standing here. Silence followed. Arguments dissolved. The conversation shifted from should we allow this to how do we control this? Command decided on a compromised one that would quietly shape the squadron's future. The modification would not be formally documented to avoid widespread, uncontrolled tampering, but trusted mechanics, those with the skill and intuition to understand the risks, would be instructed privately on how to replicate the adjustment with precision. Only select aircraft would receive it at first. hidden behind routine maintenance schedules to avoid attracting outside scrutiny. The effect was immediate. Mission survivability increased. Reconnaissance accuracy improved. Pilots began returning with unprecedented confidence, knowing their aircraft could outrun danger instead of merely enduring it. Even morale, often overlooked but essential, surged across the unit. A new narrative formed among the crews. They were no longer passive observers in the sky. They were predators disguised as prey. But the transformation didn't stop there. Allied engineers, once skeptical, took a quiet interest in the timing adjustment. Whispered conversations spread across bases, technicians exchanging notes, testing the limits of engines previously believed to be operating at full capacity. Nothing official, nothing written, just a spark of innovation ignited by one man's refusal to ignore the obvious. Still, a greater question loomed. How far could this adjustment be pushed before it reached its true limit? And more importantly, what would happen if the Luftwaffe discovered the secret behind their failed intercepts? These answers and deeper consequences would soon unfold in ways neither side could have predicted. Long after the first modified aircraft outran German fighters, the impact of that stupid adjustment continued spreading through the squadron like an invisible pulse. Planes, once written off as vulnerable liabilities, were now returning with unprecedented reliability. Intelligence officers noticed that maps were filling with clearer photographs, more accurate coordinates, and sharper reconnaissance details. Missions that used to take twice as long were being completed swiftly, with pilots reporting fewer evasive maneuvers and significantly reduced contact with enemy interceptors. Something had shifted in the rhythm of the war, even if the broader Allied command didn't yet understand why. But while the unit quietly celebrated, the Luftwaffe was descending into confusion. German analysts, increasingly alarmed by repeated failures to intercept these reconnaissance aircraft, began re-examining every assumption. They recalculated climb rates, adjusted pursuit angles, and even blamed atmospheric anomalies. Yet the results stayed the same. These Allied aircraft simply wouldn't be caught. The implication was humiliating. German pilots trained to dominate the skies were now being outpaced by machines they had previously dismissed as flying targets. Within the Allied squadron, the mechanic who had made the adjustment tried to remain unnoticed, but secrecy had a way of unraveling. Other units began hearing rumor stories of a recon plane that behaved like a tuned race car, of a mechanic who found hidden power where no one else thought to look. Some believed it was nonsense. Others quietly requested consultations, hoping to replicate the miracle. The more the story spread, the more it evolved into an unspoken doctrine: trust, intuition, challenge assumptions, and never underestimate the potential buried inside even the most flawed machine. Engineers eventually took a deeper interest without publicly acknowledging it. They began evaluating factory timing settings and discovered subtle inconsistencies between engines of the same model, tiny tolerances that, under battlefield stress, could significantly reduce performance. The mechanic's adjustment wasn't reckless, after all. It was correction. He had seen what the factory had missed. In time, certain production standards were quietly revised, and field manuals updated with vague but suggestive language, encouraging mechanics to evaluate timing responsiveness where appropriate. No one openly admitted the source of the change, but those within the squadron knew. And the impact didn't stop at engineering. The pilots who flew these transformed aircraft began to shift their entire mindset. Instead of operating from fear, they flew with tactical confidence, knowing they could evade interceptors or escape unfavorable engagements. This psychological shift, subtle but powerful, began influencing how missions were planned. Reconnaissance flights grew bolder, deeper, more aggressive. Intelligence quality soared, contributing to operations that would later shape major strategic decisions. The consequences rippled outward, far beyond a single squadron, far beyond a single engine. Still, the greatest legacy of the adjustment was not technical. It was human. It proved that innovation in war doesn't always come from laboratories or command rooms. Sometimes it comes from the hangar floor, from the man who refuses to accept the limitations stamped into metal by someone who has never flown into enemy guns. It showed that even in the rigid structure of military protocol, breakthroughs could emerge from curiosity, intuition, and the courage to question what everyone else assumed was unchangeable. As for the Germans, they never discovered the truth. They continued searching for phantom upgrades, secret engines, and classified prototypes that never existed. Their analysts could explain every variable except the one that mattered most. The engine timing had been altered by a mechanic who simply trusted what he heard and felt. The absence of a clear answer left a lingering, unspoken acknowledgement that sometimes the smallest mysteries can undermine even the strongest war machine. And in the years after the war, this quiet modification lived on not as a celebrated innovation, but as a whispered legend among pilots and mechanics. A reminder that in the vast machinery of conflict, even the tiniest adjustment can rewrite fate. If you've made it all the way to this point, you're exactly the kind of viewer who keeps these forgotten chapters of military history alive. Stories like this where a tiny decision, a small adjustment, or a single moment of intuition changes the fate of an entire squadron deserve to be remembered. And your support is what allows us to continue uncovering them. So before you go, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to ensure you never miss the next hidden innovation, tactical surprise, or wartime mystery we're about to reveal. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how a stupid adjustment outperformed even German fighters, then show your support by leaving a like. It tells the algorithm that these stories matter, and it really helps the channel grow. And because you reached the end, here's something special. Go to the comments and write small changes, big consequences, so we know we repart to the viewers who stare until the final second. Finally, don't leave just yet, tour. Next mission is already waiting for you. Click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now to continue exploring the hidden, overlooked, and unbelievable moments that shaped the history of war.